Alright, so I've got the electronics set up and wired up pretty much as they're going to be. I've disbanded the idea of doing the muzzle flash mod because it's just going to be too much mucking around and it's taken too much of the joy out of the build for me. So I figure, who needs it? So just putting it back together at the moment because I'm a little dubious as to whether this grenade launcher is actually going to prime and latch and fire. So I'm thinking I might put it together, do a test, fit and fire with that, make sure it's going to work. Then if it is, I know I'm all good. I'll have to pull it back apart and prep and repaint this side, obviously the other side of that side. And then I can reassemble and put it all back together once it's done. So getting there slowly but surely. I know I mentioned in one of my previous videos that there was a guy that had done a 3D printed base for the magazine. This is his design, which basically magazine goes into it and you get that type of effect. I just found it was too bulky and didn't quite line up the way that I would like it to with the lines of the actual shrouds. So I've redrawn it and am doing my own version. I'm doing a print of that as we speak. It's not quite as bulky as this one, and the lines and what have you should line up better. So that will be next. Okay, so as I mentioned previously, I was doing the replacement base for the original magazine base, and in usual 3D printing fashion, you have the steps that you go through. And just so that people understand and to give you the realistic perception, right, you go through your first print, which fails for one reason or another, usually a setup issue. In this case, my thermistor that reads the temperature of the print bed failed, so it basically didn't finish the print. The second one is what we call the traditional bird's nest, where it doesn't adhere to your build plate and starts to move around, and you end up with this type of effect, as you can see the actual shape that it should have been. Love it. This was the design that Devon, I believe the guy's name was, did and sent me, which was what the first 3 attempts were. I thought it was a little bit too chunky, a little bit too thick in the profile. You sort of see where it sits on there. It just looked like it was just a bit too chunky. So I thought, I just want to bring it down a little bit. So I redrew the whole thing from scratch. This one came out nice, but sat a little bit too high, and the magazine wouldn't clip into place. I then trimmed it down a fraction, just a mil, to get this one, which wasn't bad, but it wasn't quite the lines I wanted. Then I did this one, which was much better, but again, not quite the design, didn't quite follow the lines and what have you, till finally I've settled on this one, which magazine fits into, and then when you slide it in, when it clips into place, you get that effect. So the curves line up much better than what the previous ones did, and there's this little kick at the back here which sort of takes up some of that gap that you can sort of see there, and yeah, it's just lines up much better than what the other ones did, so I'm much happier, and it's not as chunky. So yeah, that was the one that I sort of have decided on. So I'll make that file available to you guys. I'll pop it up in the comments section of this, but compared to Devon's original design, if I pop that on there and pop it in, you see it's much chunkier and it sort of falls back here. This doesn't align properly. You've got this sort of step gap at the back and what have you. That yeah, it just wasn't quite what I wanted. I wasn't quite happy with it. So I know it's probably being a bit pedantic, but you know, c'est la vie. So yeah, this is my version, the Jadocast version. So seems to sit much better. I'm much happier with that now. So all right, so that's the outer shell. Obviously I've got to sand and paint that up and what have you, so more to go with that side of things. This side, I was going to close it all up and what have you, but I'm sort of thinking I may as well prep it and what have you, so that if I close it up and it works fine, then I can leave it closed up and don't have to pull it apart again. So I'm going to pull all basically everything out of this shell, flip it over, give it the sand and a preliminary paint and what have you, before I reinstall everything and go again. So what I'll do is I'll pull everything out and we'll have a look and see what the go is. And I know someone on the forums, their black wire accidentally disconnected from their circuit board, so I'm just going to show you where that black wire connects from your battery. Here connects to the circuit board there, and the other end of it runs to this little circuit board here. I'll have to pull the whole thing out to have a look and see what that is, but I think it was that end that he needed, so hopefully that helps. And again, yeah, that's the cut down trigger lock. So with that cut down, it allows you to depress your rev trigger and negates the need to have a cut-off switch on your flywheels. All right, back to it. I'll come back once I've pulled everything out and given the other side of sand and a preliminary coat of paint. Okay, so got the paint done on the two halves and it's kind of ready to put back together. The whole muzzle flash thing has been plaguing me, and I know that if I was to put this back together and didn't have the muzzle flash, that it would drive me insane. And so I've had to try and work out a way of doing it, because I just know that down the track I'd be like, I just want to take it apart and do it. So I finally figured it out. Basically I've set up an LED. It's a 10mm. It was a round tip LED. I've sanded it flat to make it like a top hat style LED. I think the resistor there is let me double check. I think it is a 180 ohm resistor. That will allow a 3 watt LED to run off the 6 volts. And then I've gone through this switch and finally figured out that this bottom right hand one becomes an earth when the switch is not depressed. So as the pusher extends forward to fire a dart, it becomes an earth. So if I connect the positive from this assembly directly to the positive terminal and the negative to that bottom right terminal, every time the pusher extends and this button is allowed to undepress, the LED will light up. All right, so what I'm going to do is put that together now and solder it up, and then I'll come back and show you basically how it works, and we'll go from there. All right, so now I have the LED wired. This wire will tuck in along these hollowed sections. I might use a little bit of hot glue to sort of hold it down into these channels and to keep it all centered. Ducts down underneath the flywheel cage, runs through with these other wires. I've piggybacked off that little wire there, and then the other positive wire runs up into your main terminal here, so where your power comes in. Now the effect is you get your counter comes up, and when you press your trigger and that fires, your LED flashes as well. No, that's because that switches. Well, once everything's held in place, it will work fine. All right, so yeah, worked out the muzzle flash. Okay, now I'm going to have to put everything back in and get ready to close it up, and then we'll run through a test of everything. If we're happy with how everything works, then I can start to reassemble it completely. So I'll come back once we've sort of got everything back into place and ready to close it up, and then we'll check it all out. Alright, so I now have everything back in place where it should be, and the wiring run through for the muzzle flash, which is now just hot glued down just to sort of keep it from moving around. So I'm ready to close this up, I think, and see how we go. So the muzzle flash, you have a magazine in obviously, and then as you press your trigger, so there's your muzzle flash. Okay, alright, we'll close it up and we'll have a look at that shotgun section, see if that's going to prime and latch and fire, and then we'll take it from there. Okay, good news is it's looking good and it's gone back together and everything fits back together, but that spring's way too strong or what have you for this to prime and lock into place, so it's not working. So I'm going to have to look into that and see what I can do, but the rest of it works quite well. You can see the muzzle flash. Works. The clear barrel is a little bit more visible than what I would have liked, but it's still, the overall look is there. So, but I'm going to have to take it apart and maybe try a different spring. Cut a link off that spring maybe, I don't know. I'll have to have a bit of a look and see what I can do. I'll let you know what I figure out.